Good evening, everyone. This is Professor Arshi Khan, Assistant Professor from Ahmed Sabu Siddique College of Engineering, Department of Electronics, Baikala, Mumbai, Maharashtra. Today's topic for my presentation for Week 2 video is the standards which are basically used to control the effect of EMF exposure and their ill effects on human beings and environment. This is a part of International FDP on Environment and Sustainability. Let's have a gist of Week 1 video details. The Week 1 video was related to the ill effects of EMF related to environment. In this particular video, we studied that EMF fields are made up of electric and magnetic fields which are perpendicular to each other and to the direction of propagation. Exposure to electromagnetic fields is basically not a new phenomenon. However, during the 20th century, electromagnetic exposure to man-made electromagnetic fields has been steadily increasing as growing electricity demand, ever-advancing technologies, and changes in social behavior have created more and more artificial sources. Everyone is exposed to a complex mix of weak electric and magnetic fields, both at home and at work. From the generation and transmission of electricity, domestic appliances and industrial equipment to telecommunications and broadcasting. Let's look at some of the environmental standards related to EMF. There are many international organizations like WHO, which is World Health Organization, ICNIRP, which is International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, IEEE, which is Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer, FCC, which is Federal Communications Commission. These all standard organizations set up standards and support research on the level of absorption of EMF radiations and associations between EMR and ill health. The first standard organization, which is more popular than any other, is World Health Organization. Its initiatives are health concerns of EMF exposure led WHO to establish International EMF Project in 1996 to assess the scientific evidence of possible health effects of EMF in frequency range between 0 to 300 GHz. This project had 54 participating countries, which included South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Tanzania, excluding Nigeria, and 8 international organizations too. WHO, through the International EMF Project, has established a program to monitor the EMF scientific literature to evaluate the health effects from exposure to EMF in a range between 0 to 300 GHz, to provide advice about possible EMF hazards and to identify suitable mitigation measures. Following extensive international reviews, the International EMF Project has promoted research to fill gaps in knowledge. In response, national governments and research institutions have funded over $250 million on EMF research over the past 10 years. In May 2011, WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is IARC, on the strength of accumulated evidence, classified extremely low-frequency magnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic, which is not established yet. WHO also conducted various studies like Interphone in 2010 and Cephalo in 2011 to check health effects from weak RF signals from base stations and RF receivers. Study also indicates that it is not established yet that the weak signals from the base stations are a result of any effect are resulting kind of ill effects on human health. There are certain WHO guidelines which are given as the WHO has compiled a database which is known as Global Health Observatory or GHO, which includes worldwide standards for countries who have legislation on exposure to EMF fields. Over 80% participating countries, which are 194 states, surveyed have legislation on exposure to electromagnetic fields as per national standards given by WHO. The second standard organization is International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which is ICNIRP. It is an organization which is recognized by WHO. The ICNIRP guidelines on limiting exposure to EMF fields for the protection of humans exposed to radiofrequency electromagnetic fields in the range between 100 kHz to 300 GHz. This guideline covers many applications such as 5G technologies, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, mobile phones, base stations, etc. Separate guidelines is given for occupational exposures and exposures of the general public. Occupational exposure in these guidelines refers to the adult exposed to time-varying electric and magnetic fields from 1 Hz to 10 MHz at their workplaces, generally under known conditions, as a result of performing their regular or assigned job activities. By contrast, the term general population refers to individuals of all ages and of varying health status, which might increase the variability of individual susceptibilities. In many cases, members of the public are unaware of the exposures to EMF. These considerations underlie the adoption of more stringent exposure restrictions for public than for the workers while they are occupationally exposed. These restrictions on the effects of exposure are termed as basic restrictions, some of which are: between 1 Hz to 10 MHz, the basic restrictions are provided on the current density to prevent effects on nervous system. 100 kHz to 10 GHz are the basic restrictions on specific absorption rate is provided to prevent the whole body heat stress and excessive localized tissue heating. Between 100 kHz to 10 MHz, restrictions are provided on both current density and specific absorption rate. Between 10 GHz to 300 GHz, restrictions are provided on power density to prevent excessive heating in the tissue at or near the body surface, which may harm the tissue. The third standard organization or institute is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineer. It has approved a draft which is known as C95.1 2019 for safety levels with respect to human exposure to electric, magnetic and electromagnetic fields. The safety limits for protection of people against adverse health effects of exposure to EMF in frequency range between 0 to 300 GHz are presented in the standard. The exposure limits are intended to apply generally to people permitted in restricted environments and to general public in unrestricted environments. The last standard organization is Federal Communications Commission, which is FCC, which is very popular. This particular FCC's organization, it sets limits on exposure of electromagnetic radiations from cell phone and towers. These limits are given in terms of unit, which is referred as SAR, which we already discussed, which is specific absorption rate. SAR is nothing but a measure of amount of radio frequency energy absorbed by the body when using a mobile phone. FCC requires cell phone manufacturers to ensure that the phone complies with these objective limits for safe exposure. Any cell phone at or below these SAR levels is a safe phone as measured by these standards. Limits for public exposure from cellular phones is an SAR level of 1.6 watts per kilogram. Every mobile phone comes with a SAR limit, and we as customers should comply to it in order to save ourselves from exposure to EMF. These standard organizations formulate guidelines and thus ensure through their research and forums that minimum harm is caused to the human health and environment from exposure to EMF fields. Here are some of the references. Thank you. Thanks a lot.